evening, viewers. What happened in Galwan in Ladakh, the way the Chinese attacked us, their brutality and barbarism has got all of us really angry. We're all extremely emotional over the loss of 20 brave hearts, their families shattered. But every Indian today is talking about how should we make China pay. Now, while I understand the emotion, understand the outrage, the anger, justifiably so, over what has happened to our brave soldiers, I don't know if the emotional reaction is being guided in the right direction. The whole chorus that is now growing about boycott Chinese goods, which in many ways has simply become about giving up on your Chinese phones or Chinese televisions or Chinese food for some people. Is that the right way to go? Is a nationwide public sentiment to boycott Chinese goods really going to make a difference? So tonight we are going to try and understand this. Yes, there is a need to make India more reliant, self-reliant. Yes, I am a believer of any campaign that the government starts for Atmanirbhar Bharat, for going local, for boosting our manufacturers, promoting our companies, strengthening our economy. But let's try and understand just how deeply linked are the Indian and Chinese economies. In an emotional jerk reaction, will we harm ourselves more than the Chinese? That's where I am coming from. And that is why I want to have a calm, intelligent, well-researched conversation with experts about what can be done, how can India reduce its dependence on China, and how do we deal with it. It can't happen overnight. Let me tell you why it's going to be challenging. Point number one, as things stand right now, the made in India things are often costlier. Not just for us. It's not to say that you and I have to pay a lot more. But we are living in a competitive global world and the trade is global as well. That's point number one. Over 100 Chinese firms have a strong presence in our country already in various aspects. And we're talking about trade, we're talking about investments, manufacturing, all of that. Several Indians are employed in these Chinese firms. There are big Chinese investments in our companies. There's a lot of funding that comes from China-backed companies that help our companies grow. There are several Indian products we use, you and I use, products we sell to the rest of the world and make money off, for which the raw materials that come from China. And so overnight, a boycott China rhetoric perhaps may not be the answer. There has to be a larger policy discussion on this. I am not singling out any company, any brand, but the names on your screens actually show you how some of our new age companies, very successful companies, so companies you and I use in our daily lives, are actually what they are because of the Chinese backing. I want to give you specific examples where the problem will come in. Example number one is the pharmaceutical industry. And this is very important, viewers, because as you know, as the coronavirus spread and China went into a lockdown and we halted a lot of our trade for a few days, it was the pharmaceutical company that actually was extremely scared. For life-saving drugs that we manufacture in our country, there is a huge amount of dependence on the raw materials that come from China. Almost 70 to 90% of the import actually comes from China. So think about the pharmaceutical hub that India is and what really fuels that before you actually join any campaign. Let's take the solar industry. A new industry needs to grow. That's the future. 84% of the solar requirement of the National Solar Mission is met through imports from China. Now there are of course other options, but there is a reason why China is the biggest contributor here. So imagine what happens to all of our energy needs, all of our vision to become self-reliant with solar energy. if we don't and the government doesn't change the policy if it is required. Here's another example. Everybody says give up on a Chinese phone. But do you know that the phones that are manufactured in our country are largely based on components that come from China? Yes, 80% of the components, as per the industry itself, actually come from China. So viewers, let's take a deep, calm breath. Let's arm ourselves with information that will really help us decide if we want to jump on this bandwagon of a widespread outrage and public sentiment about boycotting Chinese goods. Will we harm ourselves more in the near term rather than actually teaching a lesson to the Chinese? And if indeed we need to reduce our dependence, if indeed we need to de-link our economy, how do we do that? What policy changes do the government have to make? That's what you need to know. Let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining us right now. Prashant Tandon, founder and CEO of 1MG, representing the farmer sector and giving us insights into that. Mr. K. Ganesh, an entrepreneur and partner for Growthstory. He is a promoter for new age companies like Bigbasket and Portia Medical. So it will be great to have that insight. BC Bhartiya, National President for Confederation of All India Traders. Now, the Traders Association has actually come out with a list of 3,000 Chinese products that we can boycott. We will talk about that. Sandhya Sharma, editor for Technology Policy and Foreign Policy with Economic Times Prime, joins us this evening, has a lot of insights on how deeply the two businesses are linked, and so does Professor Arun Kumar, Chair Professor for the Institute of Social Sciences, joining us this evening. Thank you so much, all of you. Sandhya, let's begin with you, with an overarching understanding of just how deeply linked we are. We keep talking about an imbalanced trade deficit, but in layman terms, it simply means that a lot of our companies benefit from imports and exports to China.
Thank you. Totally. We are so much dependent on China for supply chain. The entire supply chain, as you said, that actually is it's embroiled with the Chinese tech companies. They have a lot of investments. One thing is for sure that the policy needs to change in a very well-calibrated manner. It can't be a knee-jerk reaction from India. What is happening on the border on one side and what is happening on the economic side. Those two have to be seen very separately. Not in silos though, but definitely the policy needs to one needs to evangelize the policy. I mean, you can't actually say that end of the day we don't want any Chinese products, but what do you have in hand? The startup industry is mushrooming because of the Chinese investments, even though they are not as big as the American FDI investments in India, but they are fairly huge.
Okay, yes, absolutely. And, the point that you made about even our companies dependent on Chinese in funding and investments. Let me bring in Mr. Ganesh on that aspect. Mr. Ganesh, a lot of the brand names that are doing the rounds, it seems when we look into it, seem to have some amount of Chinese support. So what is your own sense, this whole rhetoric that's going around right now saying boycott Chinese goods? Is it really sensible for our companies, our business and our economy?
Currently, the recent escalation at the border is obviously distressing and alarming. I think, and consequently, the common man, the people are affected and are reacting in this manner is quite understandable. But we need to tackle, like any country-to-country relation, good relation or poor relations or challenging relations, we need to tackle it at multiple levels. Now, there are consumers here, there are founders, businessmen here, there are buyers here who depend on supply from China, there are bureaucrats, there are politicians, there is military. So I think the engagement in response to this, do we have to respond? Yes, we have to respond. Government has a responsibility to protect the interests of the country. Absolutely, yes. How do we respond? Can we respond on a knee-jerk basis? Can we respond based on nationalist jingoism? The answer is no. So we have to engage with them at military level, at economic level, at diplomatic level, at trade level, each one of this. This has got to be a deliberate, planned, smart action at all these places. Obviously, already a couple of months back, when that HDFC investment from Chinese bank happened, even though it was a minority stake, government passed an order saying that any foreign direct investment from countries like China will need government approval. So we have already taken action. So in my opinion, unless it is in strategic sectors like defense or infrastructure, unless it is takeover of an Indian company, like it happened with a pharma company based out of Hyderabad, became a 100% Chinese owned company. Unless it is 100% takeover, I don't think we can react in a short manner like this. We need to react. So I think I would differentiate between minority investment without control of the board, without control of the management, without running it, and a majority takeover of an Indian company. I will differentiate between strategic sector where you're investing in defense or defense production and say in a food delivery app. Okay. Obviously, data privacy is important. If it's going to be controlled by, the data is going to go into China and it's sensitive data, we don't want it to go. These are all things that anyway you need to put laws for data privacy, data protection. Don't confuse this with the border escalation. We need to act, but we need to act smartly step by step. Look at US. China right now, if I may use the word, is in the doghouse. The world is against it. They are concerned about the way they acted for the coronavirus. They are concerned with the way secrets were stolen from US because of Huawei. So there is enough challenges China is facing from countries like US. So let's wait and watch. Let's see what other countries are doing. We have to act. At the same time, don't let the act at the border go unaddressed. You have to take military action. Personally, if any of us wants to stop getting LED lights from China, want to avoid Chinese goods, great, perfect. I understand the sentiment. I also personally, emotionally feel the same way. Given a choice between two products, one Chinese, non-Chinese, I definitely will take the non-Chinese product now because my heart is burning. My blood is boiling at what's happening there. When I see those pictures in news channel. But the response cannot be based on that. Country's response cannot be based on that. Different stakeholders in the ecosystem will respond differently at different points of time. So more mature, considered, medium-term, long-term view at all levels.
You know, and I believe that this response should be left to the government, whether it's a response and the army and the diplomats, whether it's to respond militarily or it's to handle the situation diplomatically, or it is to say, okay, even on the trade front, economy front, the policy decisions have to be taken by the government. But let me try and understand what is it that the traders are suggesting we do. Mr. Bhartia, good evening to you. I understand, there is a list of 3,000 products that we can boycott. Now, usually when there is this conversation, we talk about Diwali lights and lamps and idols which are perhaps made there and imported, and phones. But beyond that, what is it that we can do which will hurt them more than hurt us and our business?
Thank you, Tanvi. Good evening to all. Let us try to understand what are the products which we are required to buy or we are buying from Chinese make. We can divide our products in three categories. We can have one necessities, one comfort, and one luxury. Okay, necessities cannot be avoided, but most of the necessities are met by our farmers and our local people. Hardly, except for technology, necessities are not required to be imported. Comforts and luxuries can be bypassed. What is the necessity we don't understand? Our balance of payment is poor. Our economy, we want our local economy to develop. We want our local people to develop. We do not have a proper control system, testing system to test that whatever is coming is as per standard or not. The toys coming in our country, are they harmful to children? We have no mechanism. Why we want those products to come in our country? Our country is not a dumping yard. We have been talking that the quality of Chinese product is not good. So if quality is not good, why do you allow import of Chinese goods? We have to understand so many things. You see, if our defense is weaker than Chinese defense, should we surrender or we fight? We have to think in that sense also. If suppose our soldiers standing on the protecting our boundaries, and if he is tempted by something by Chinese, will he get tempted and let the Chinese come inside? He is protecting our borders. Similarly, we have to protect our economy. But just by saying that something is coming cheap, that doesn't mean that it should be allowed to enter in the market. We have to see our people also. When we are talking of skill development, let our skill come out. Let our products come out. We have to see whether we are getting products under invoice, whether custom duty is really paid on the actual price, is GST paid on the actual price. What is the mechanism? Are we tracking all Chinese imported goods to the consumer? You see, GST is destination-based tax. Let us see whether what price consumer is paying, government is getting GST on that price. We have to see everything. You see, if our economy is being captured by...
No, I understand. You're right, Mr. Bhatia, that we have to see everything. Which is why I'm trying to understand why is it that you've decided to give us a list of these 3,000 products. For our viewers who haven't seen it, can you give us some insights into what these products are? And if we don't take it from China, then where do we get it from? Are Indians manufacturing it? Are they? Those companies need support? Is that what the government should instead be looking at putting high tariffs for imports of Chinese goods and helping our industries instead? Wouldn't that be a better way?
Tanvi, we have given out the list that these are the items which are not necessities. They are gift articles. They are of different categories, which we have toys. Then so many things we have given in the list. These are not necessities. We have alternates for that. We should promote our things. We should try to see that our industry grow. We should open the doors outside, not inside. We are opening doors inside and letting the people
Okay,
come
Mr.
into
Bhatia,
the
I
country.
will come back to you. We have a bit of a problem with your feed. Let me fix that so I can see you better and hear you better. But let me take this point across to Professor Arun Kumar and then I'll go to Prashant Tandon. Professor Kumar,
yes.
Shouldn't this be dealt with more at a policy level rather than saying, oh, simply start boycotting goods, don't buy this but buy that?
So, Tanvi, what has happened is very unfortunate because China is our neighbor and we need to have good relations with China. It is a dominant power militarily and economically, and we have to see how to deal with it. So, as you said, we cannot have a knee-jerk reaction to it. At the level of negotiations with China, we'll have to use everything that we have in terms of economic clout, etc., because they have a $50 billion trade surplus with us. So obviously for them it's a market that's important. But let us also remember we are the 7th largest market for them. So it's not that we are the top market and that we can hurt them very badly. Second point is that what we import from them are more manufactured products. What we export to them are basically more raw materials and things like that. So a lot of our production now has got dependent on what they supply to us. So if we can find alternate sources for that, that is fine. But we are also members of WTO, so we cannot arbitrarily impose tariffs, So if we are to negotiate, then what we need to do is, can we use non-tariff barriers, and that is where the public sentiment comes in, What other people were saying, if people decide, that they would not buy the Chinese-made products, then that's one possibility. But it cannot be done by the government. Government cannot suddenly announce that, people should boycott Chinese goods, etc. It can only use the trade as a negotiating chip in the bargain with the Chinese. We should also remember that, what has happened over the last 20 years. from a very small trade with China, now it's become our major trading partner because basically China has developed technology. China has huge investments and surpluses globally, and that it deploys globally. So therefore, what has happened is that we have lagged behind in terms of technology, and that's why we are not able to compete with them in the international market. And why is that happened? And that is because we have not spent on R&D what we needed to spend. We have not spent on education what we needed to spend so as to have highly trained manpower. China has moved dramatically in the last 40 years to upgrade its universities and colleges and improve education and skills so that it has now become the global manufacturer. And therefore, it's part of a lot of supply chains. And if we begin to boycott, openly the Chinese goods, then what happens to the goods that we get from other countries which have Chinese components in them? So it's a very tricky issue as to how to boycott. But yes, at the level of sentiment of people, final goods can be boycotted, like manja for, the kites, the idols for our gods, the pitchkaris and things like that. Final products like, mobile phones, etc. But let me also say today, our economy is in a bit of a shock given the lockdown and the pandemic. And therefore, the economy is way down. And at this point, to have a further shock to the economy by saying that we'll boycott things and buy the more expensive things, or substitute what we are buying from China from other sources, which will be more expensive, that'll be another shock to the economy. Secondly, as you rightly pointed out, a lot of our startup companies have investments that have come in from there. So, what would happen to that? That would be also important. But, as one of the panelists was saying, we have to decide which are the strategic industries which we need to protect and which are the non-strategic industries where we don't need to protect our markets. So, these are things that the government would have to decide, but it has to be a very considered long-term policy. It cannot be a short-term knee-jerk thing, which the people can do on their own. People, being nationalistic or being hurt at this point, they will automatically boycott certain things. But that is going to be a small percentage of the total trade and of the total trade deficit that we have. So it has to be a long-term strategy in my view.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to come to that point, and maybe once Mr. Bhartia is back with us, I will ask him that question about just what percentage of trade are these smaller goods like toys or gift articles like he was mentioning, and what kind of impact can we have if we do just that? Because Prashant Tandon, it's very difficult to really separate a lot of the products that we're using today, which may have raw materials which have come from China. I mean, my phone may be manufactured in India, but it could have components from China. My car could be made in India, but it could have auto components from China. My life-saving drug could be manufactured in India, but it perhaps has some, products coming in, raw materials coming in from China.
Absolutely, and likely it will. I think we need to be very calibrated on. There's one thing to have a reaction, but the important thing is to have a long-term strategic response. And response versus reaction are two very different things. I totally understand the sentiment. It's a tough situation for everyone in the country, and our blood boils. That happens. And now the way I see it is that the consumers reacting in a certain way does not necessarily mean that the response of the country from a strategic perspective also needs to be in the same vein. I think I do believe that it's a globalized world. We have to clearly understand and appreciate that we actually have a huge opportunity in front of us to bring certain important reforms. And why should the entire world today is looking for diversification away from China, more to secure their global supply chains, and for multiple reasons otherwise. And this is one of the reasons also, the constant geopolitical battles that are going on has made an opportunity for brand made in India to actually be something positive. Now it is the onus is on us whether we are able to capitalize on that. Now, and I would take it from a positive vein. If consumers are willing to pay a premium for brand make in India, it's a great opportunity. Entrepreneurs should certainly create product that the consumers are willing to pay a premium for. But it cannot be a policy way of this globalized world actually works for everyone. The cost of medicines would be out of control if we do not source it from the cheapest place in the world, which happens to be China. Should we do a lot more to diversify the supply chain and make sure that alternate sources or India can come up? It's a big wake up call. I think COVID itself was a big wake up call. And now with tensions kind of happening, we know that, yes, we need to be more self reliant. We need to be equipped to diversify or at least have multiple equivalent sources or invest in our own capabilities to get all of those things in. But what we cannot have as a situation is that as a knee-jerk reaction, we may not choose the neighbors we live with, we may not like them, but we have to live with them. And continuous escalation of any conflict or issue never solves it. So there will be issues, there will be escalation, there will be reaction, but we have to understand how are we going to live together, because we live in the same part of the world and there is a lot of mutual benefit to be had.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Let me take a specific example. We've spoken about industries and specific sectors where, like you said, if I'm buying a life-saving drug, most likely I will have, a drug which has a raw material that's coming from China. Let's take another example. And Sandhya, there was a huge controversy that actually broke out earlier this year about Huawei and about our Indian telecom companies using Huawei for its 5G trials. It became a huge debate and controversy. The government representations were made to the government on whether or not they should be allowed. There are security issues. Let's for a minute say, okay, keep the security issues aside. But isn't that also a big example of just how deeply linked our businesses and our progress is with what China has to offer? Because at that time we realized that there aren't too many other companies that can provide the same kind of technology as Huawei can.
Sure, Tanvi. 5G and Huawei has been in the limelight, not just in India, but globally. The company has been at the helm of affairs in US, Canada, Australia. So a lot of countries have been against it. And the company itself has been so deep into the systems of these countries, very much including India, that it's very hard to decouple and say that Huawei is something that will ban. So definitely that's not the intention of the government either. At the same time, we have to also see that is the company providing strategic inroads into your critical sectors? Is that a matter of concern for the government? Definitely. These are the concerns that the Indian government would be raising at various international forums. But at the same time, singling out one company is not an opportunity that India would be taking. At the same time, WTO commitments wouldn't allow India to single out one company. At the same time, on 5G, India has not said anything very specific on trials either. With coronavirus, things are very much on the hold. So it's a wait and watch policy on 5G and Huawei per se at the moment, not just in India, but globally at the moment.
I actually wanted to go, ask you further on the WTO commitments that you said, or in general, there are norms and commitments and pacts and agreements that nations actually become part of when it comes to global trade. Again, just how practical is a demand to boycott Chinese goods, keeping in mind the agreements that India is part of?
So, blanket Chinese ban, neither can India do it, neither has the rest of the world. China has been part of the tech space for a very long time. The whole supply chain, even the Indian startups, for that matter, the tech Indian startups, which are manufacturing India-made phones, actually have components coming from China. So the policy definitely at a WTO front, there is a very different diplomatic engagement that goes on. However, at the same time, China will definitely drag India in case something like that is decided by India. At the same time, practically, a knee-jerk reaction is not something that would lead to anything constructive. This will actually impact our own startup system that's actually started mushrooming.
Okay, so then comes the question of what do we do with the sentiment that is on ground? Is there a constructive way to use that, Prashant Tandon? I mean, I honestly want to take the conversation beyond your Chinese lamps and Chinese phones. If people are angry today and want to boycott and make an impact, actually make an impact to the Chinese business, what else can be done?
No, I think it's a great opportunity, as I said, for Indian entrepreneurs. Now, brand Make in India I think we've been waiting for it for a long time, that a product that has Make in India actually gets a premium. And as K. Ganesh also said, and I totally echo, if an Indian brand is available of the same quality, I am willing to pay a little bit premium for that. And I think so it's an opportunity to actually create those brands and products within the Indian ecosystem. I think the Indian entrepreneurs should feel that there is a certain sentiment where consumers are going to be happy about products that are made in India and give it a little more leeway or a premium. So let's try and make the most of it and create those brands in our market. So I think we should see it as a consumer sentiment is what brands are built on, and consumer sentiment clearly is talking about an opportunity where we can create brands that show it as a positive that they are made in India, rather than a baggage that they carry either from a cost or a quality perspective. So in my mind, that's the direction to go. And see, we have to understand the reaction is understandable. There has been an outrage, there should be, but it's something
Yeah.
that we should all think about. From a long term, our response is not, this is not what will continue over the next many years. We can't keep boycotting and throwing things away. I think what we have to do is figure out how we can be better and command a premium for our offerings.
Yes, let's also not forget that it's not only what we bring from China and what we import from China, while in comparison to that, our exports may be far lesser in amount. 1.17 lakh crore export from India to China, while the import value of all the goods has been about 4.92 lakh crore. So yes, the gap is huge. But let's not also forget that a lot of Indian companies are also benefiting from sending goods to China, and that also has to be kept in mind if we decide to say we are going to not use your goods. There is a balance that has to be maintained. I just wanted to point two more things as I go across to Professor Arun Kumar. Viewers, there was a bit of a controversy that took place over a Chinese company emerging as the lowest bidder for the Delhi-Meerut rail project. Now, a special project that's being that for which tenders have been put out, a Chinese company has put the lowest bid. Now, the government in many ways has clarified that there is no decision that has been taken on it so far. Only these bids have come. Of course, the Swadeshi Jagran Manch and many others have already raised an issue saying you can't give it to a company even if they're the lowest bidder. But think about it. That is a larger policy decision that has to be left in the hands of the government. The government needs to decide whether that's actually the best company possible, technology wise, cost effective wise, speed wise, to deliver what we need to build our country's infrastructure for our own country. And if there are other options, then fine, let's go ahead with it. I want to bring another example because there's so much of surround sound over this sentiment right now, and the sentiment is justified. But today the news came that railways and an arm and a company of railways has cancelled the contract of a Chinese company. Now viewers, this actually happened not because simply our soldiers have been targeted by China, but because this company was given the tender on in 2016 and they were supposed to finish the project by 2019. We are in 2020 and only 20% of the work has been completed by this company. So as is in any other scenario where only 20% has been work has been completed, the deadline is long gone, we've decided to cancel that contract and give it to somebody who deserves it better. That's what happens in a global scenario. In a global trade environment, you go for the one that gives you the best service, the best goods, and the most competitive one. Professor Arun Kumar, at the end of the day, the market dynamics also have to be factored in. While policy is one thing, many of the Indian companies would want to have the freedom to decide what makes the most business sense for them.
So you're absolutely right. Under the WTO framework, the idea is that there'll be transparency in all negotiations, contract giving, what we export and what we import, what tariffs we levy on different goods that are coming from different countries. They know that we cannot distinguish between the exports and imports from one country and another country. So in a sense, what you're talking about is the non-tariff barriers. For other reasons, we say cancel a contract or we don't buy from some country and we buy from some other country. That is left actually to the what are called the non-tariff barriers. So if suppose the Kate is very active or Swadeshi Jagran Manch is very active, and that then influences people and they buy less of the Chinese goods. They go to the market and they see what is called an Indian product, made in India, and another product which says made in China, and they prefer to buy the made in India product even if it's more expensive, then that's the non-tariff barrier. Now the government can indirectly encourage that, but it cannot directly do that. Government cannot, come out openly and say, let us boycott Chinese goods. That would go against the things. Even raising tariff, for instance, in the last 3 budgets, we have raised tariffs so that as to promote more of Make in India. But many of the countries abroad, they have objected to these raising of tariffs. The US has also objected to it. So what we have to distinguish is where are the tariff barriers and where are the non-tariff barriers. I don't think the tariff barriers or openly saying that we are going to boycott Chinese goods by the government, that's going to work. But indirectly, yes. But let me say, why is it that we are weak? Why is it that we are importing so much from China? And that is because they have, scale economy in production. They have technology which is superior, and therefore they can manufacture things cheaper and export it to India. So it's a long-term problem that we've had where our technologies lag behind. And therefore, we are not able to produce, as cheaply as others are able to produce. And that's why we are having, a trade deficit constantly in the Indian economy. So if we want to compete with China, then we have to have a long-term strategy in which we are able to produce things cheaper than what they are able to produce, and that obviously requires technology, that requires, skilled manpower, that requires infrastructure. Our infrastructure is very weak. So if you remember, in the last 3-4 years, some companies have moved out of China, but they've not moved to India. They've moved to Vietnam and such countries where the infrastructure is much better. People can export very easily from there. So we need to work at our infrastructure. We need to work at our education system. We need to work at our R&D and technology upgradation. And we need, to support our industry with technology. So, if we do these long-term things, then I think over a period of time, we'd be able to take on the challenge that China poses to us. But if we just do a knee-jerk reaction, then in the long run, we'll still lose out if we don't do the right things by the economy.
Okay, I completely agree with you. And some of these things is perhaps something that the government needs to do right now. If the sentiment is there, if people are backing the government, let's design policies, long-term policies that will make us self-reliant, that will, give us the edge in terms of competitiveness, that will make our labor more skilled, and so that we can use them for better manufacturing, that empowers our manufacturing and our small and medium enterprises, our startups. Let's give them the funding they need, so then they don't have to look elsewhere for that kind of funding. But Mr. Bhartiya is back with us finally. Mr. Bhartiya, sorry about all of that technical problems, but the question I was asking you was, give us some examples. If somebody does want to do their part in in hitting China's economy and business, what are the goods we can boycott without hurting our own guys?
You see, the goods of non-necessity goods, especially in electronic field, in toys, in gift articles. What is wrong? Why can't we make it? We can make it. You see, we have to first understand, is Chinese government directly or indirectly subsidizing cost of manufacture there? What power charges they are taking, what labor charges they are taking, what is the rate of bank interest they are charging. You said this is indirect subsidizing the local products by Chinese government. We will have to stand by it. We will have to ensure that these products quality wise cannot match Indian products. We can say that. But because of cost factor, why their cost is low, that is the matter of investigation. You see, we can very openly say that we will have to check each and every point of costing. Why they can sell cheap? Let us understand that. And then the rate of taxes, how much taxes they are paying in our country. Secondly, you see, we have to see our country also. In our country, the only main source of employment is self-employment. We have to protect our people. We have to ensure that our people get their daily bread. Okay, so we just cannot say that is cheap and it is competitive. All these things are good for argument purpose. But when we talk about countrymen, we have to see how to survive our people. And for that, what we should do. And definitely government
So
will have
let
to
me,
have
Mr.
a
Bhartiya,
long-term vision.
how much of impact will we be able to make, Mr. Bhartiya, how much of impact will we be
Yes,
able
yes.
to make if we boycott these gift articles, the Chinese lamps or even their fireworks? How much of a difference can we make?
You see, the Chinese took 25 years to spread over the country. Let us start from somewhere. Let us start the feeling that we have to be Indian. We have to buy Indian. If these feelings start by next generation, we may sweep out the Chinese. But if we surrender before China, that you see it is impossible to compete them, it is impossible to boycott them, then we will be economic slave of Chinese. So we have to raise our voice. We have to start from somewhere. Let us start from somewhere. Over the period, over the years, over the
Hmm.
decades, 2 decades, we will be self-reliant country.
No, but how do we do that? You say we start from somewhere. I understand that, but the fact of the matter is, if you say you buy made in India, I can buy a made in India phone, Mr. Bhatia, but the components may have come
Yes.
from China. So, am I supposed to buy that phone or not? Am I supposed to buy a car that has auto components coming in from China? Am I supposed to use an online retail store or an online education class or an online payment app that is being funded by the Chinese? Where are we drawing the line right now?
Then we let us start from somewhere. Let us start from the thought that we have to buy Indian products. Let us start that, let small products which we can manufacture in India, we will go for that. You see, as we start moving towards Indian products, slowly and gradually, all the products over the years will become Indian. If we don't start from Diwali we can start. We can start with electronic series, which is not necessary in Ganpati, in Diwali. Let us start. Let us start with gift. No, I will not give Chinese gift to my girlfriend or to my friend or to my parents. I will give only Indian gift. Let us start from somewhere. Once we start, slowly and gradually, we will come over the issue. If we see it in totality, it will look like
Okay.
a horror. How do we go out? So our demand is, let us start. Start first. Start with your mindset. Put in your mind that you have to buy Indian goods.
Okay, Mr.
Start
Ganesh,
from
if I can
there.
come across to you just to take this point further, um, it seems to me right now that it's more about finding a direction to put our sentiment to, to satisfy our own anger and our own sentiment than actually having a strategy to impact or to hit China in any economic sense.
Yeah. So, no, I think both are important, and these are two different things really. One, at the individual level, sentiments and emotions cannot be wished away. So we need to be able to handle it. We need to be able to address it. So by all means, if you want to buy an Indian product versus a Chinese product by paying a slight premium, go ahead and do it. But that is not the country's response. That is not the strategic response. Strategic response, country's response has to be more calibrated, deliberated, planned, and has to be done at much different level. And here we cannot let emotions and jingoism rule. We need to be practical. We need to see what is the short term, medium term, long term impact, and we need to see what is the overall benefit, how it's going to help us. We need to be very smart here. Like I mentioned, getting a Chinese investment, minority investment into Indian company, which employs people in India, which generates employment in India, which makes it possible to give discounts to Indian consumer, which makes lives of Indian consumer easy, which kicks up the economy in India. All of that is very good. Now, for doing that, if one of the investors in the company, without majority control, without management control, is actually a Chinese investor, there is nothing wrong in that, because it's like Prashant mentioned, we are living in a globalized world. Yes, remove strategic sectors from it, but be measured and be clear what action you are taking, why are you taking, and what is the purpose. So that should be the strategic country's national level response. Individually, personally, don't buy the Chinese LED if it makes you feel happy that you're buying an Indian LED. But what I'm not able to understand is, unless there is a equally almost same cost alternative, are you going to tell the poor child or a lower income person from stopping him from celebrating Diwali by telling, beta, don't buy that particular diya, okay, because double the price, I don't want you to buy this diya? That is wrong. But I agree with Mr. Bhatia that directionally start moving, directionally start using more Indian products, more local products. All of that I think is positive, but that's not the strategic response. Don't confuse the two. We have to have response at every different level: economic, diplomatic, military. All of these levels have to be very different. We need to handle it. And it's not that we don't have the technology. I disagree with one of the panelists earlier that we don't have the technology, infrastructure, capability. We have never deliberately gone and promoted it. For example, you're talking about telecom infrastructure. We have an Indian company called Tejas Networks. It's a 20-year plus old company, made in India company, listed company in India, promoters in India. Great company. If the government were to step up and support it, do that extra bit of support. If they had done it 10 years back, done it 5 years back, 15 years back, we would have had a very strong alternative. So now this is a wake-up call. Just like we have seen in PPE equipment, from no PPE equipment to we have become net exporters of PPE equipment. We have the capability. We have done this under lockdown in a matter of 60 to 90 days. We created capacity. So we can do it. If we take this as a wake-up call, we have to become more Atmanirbhar. We have to become more self-reliant. We need to ensure that we are not so dependent upon multiple other countries for strategic things. We can do it. But it has got to be a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year plan. Government is a large purchaser.
No,
government is a large user.
But Mr. Ganesh, I find a little amount of convenience in the answer that you're giving me, because you're saying it's all right for companies to take Chinese money, and obviously Chinese are investing in our companies because they will get better returns when we grow, and that's all right. But let's not use some of their products. Now, isn't that a little, pick and choose and convenient, especially because you represent that industry? Why should we be dependent in that case even for the Chinese funding and the investment. Let's find investors elsewhere across the world. If our product is good, we will find funding elsewhere as well.
No, absolutely. I think you're right. It's not that, suppose we had had a policy 10 years back that no Chinese investments are allowed. Would these companies not have got funded? Absolutely not. You just saw Jio getting more than 100,000 crores of money from non-Chinese investors. Reliance Jio has done it. So we could have done it. We can still do it. So if the idea is over the next 5 years, after next 5 years, we are going to be selective, it's fine. But why would we want to do that? My first responsibility, my first focus is to ensure as a country we are able to solve unemployment. We are able to remove people from poverty. We are able to give jobs. And this money that has come in is using to create jobs in India, used to create products in India, used to make things cheaper for consumers in India. Why would I say no to it? But to your point, can I live without it? Yes, I can. I mean, suddenly today I may not be able to, but if you have a policy, we can do that. If you want to do that. So that's not a problem. We are not dependent. But in a connected global world, we should look at what is the best for our people. My first job is to ensure that I'm able to give employment. I'm able to feed my people. We have 1.3 billion people. We have poverty. We have to provide access to healthcare. If access to healthcare is available because I use Chinese money or Chinese products, that is more important to me than to do it. But again, this is emotional times. My heart goes out to what's happening in the border. We need to take action. It has got to be deliberate, measured, strategic response, not knee-jerk, not by individual level. Please boycott if you want to.
Not knee-jerk. Yes. Yes, no, I completely understand what you're saying. Thank you so much. I'm completely out of time. My apologies, Professor Kumar, but I've run out of time, so I will not be able to come to you. We'll have another round soon, I'm sure. This, with or without the clash and the loss of lives that we've witnessed in the last 2 days ago, the conversation about boycotting Chinese goods will keep coming back. It's not the first time it's happened, and really, it needs a serious look. It cannot be about rhetorics, about people seeking attention by putting out videos on social media about smashing their TVs or giving up on their phones or not eating Chinese food or uninstalling a Chinese app. That's not how you're going to make any difference. That's simply you trying to jump on a bandwagon without really understanding what's the point of it. If you truly want to know how can we make a difference, how can we de-link our industries, then think about the policy changes that can be done. Think about the alternatives in India that can be used. Think about how the government should actually be empowering the companies in India to provide the same level of competitiveness at the same cost, with the same skill that the Chinese products actually give and the Chinese companies actually provide. Just think about this, viewers. If you today say that I'm not going to buy Chinese toys, remember that impacts Indian businesses as well. In 2018-2019, India imported about 1800 crore worth of toys from China. Now, there is an entire Indian toys industry that is dependent on what's coming from China. And earlier this year, when COVID hit China and the rest of the world was still going around fine, we got impacted and this toys industry got badly impacted. Think about those companies, those smaller companies, the people they employ, the people who work there. Your knee-jerk reaction shouldn't end up impacting and damaging our own businesses, our own people, them shutting down their business or them losing jobs. Your sentiment and outrage shouldn't force the government into a knee-jerk reaction on some policy decision. This has to be properly thought out, and it has to be a long-term plan of how we make our own goods and manufacturing and services and technology as competitive as anywhere else in the world and make ourselves self-reliant. That's how you bring about the change. Thank you for joining us on this debate.